Welcome in, folks. For those who do not know, my name is Guest, also known as ItsGuestGaming, and let's hop right into the final card we've been waiting for this February, Proxima Midnight. Pretty straightforward effect. 4/7. When this card is discarded, jump to your lowest power location. That isn't full, so there's some asterisks in there that we do need to address. First off, understanding when it talks about lowest power location, it seems like a simple idea, but there's one big ongoing piece that you must remember about the board state at all times, and that's revealed versus unrevealed cards. If you take a look at this portion of the clip, you can see that the unrevealed cards do have an effect on where that does land. So it might have eventually in that turn more power later on, but during that actual moment, it does not, and that is what will determine where she lands. Popular cards like Dracula are going to be big this week with Proxima Midnight because, of course, Dracula's a 4/1, so more often than not, that lane is losing until the final Dracula effect comes to be. Being that Dracula is a end of game effect, if it is targeting Proxima Midnight at the moment in its 4/1 power state, is where Proxima will most likely go because it's most likely to be the lowest power lane. So if you're banking on that Dracula eventually growing to being a 4/8 plus that 7 power, think of the ordering of the effect of how it works with APOC, for example, where APOC starts as, let's say, a 6/8, Dracula discards it, but becomes a 4/13. Same thing with Proxima and the ordering of the placement. It will take effect later on. That 4/8 will register after Proxima has landed on the board, assuming she lands in a location that has the lowest power in that moment, because you may have that Dracula lane completely filled up, which means she's going to move to the second lowest location. So there's really only one time that Proxima doesn't end up on the board, and that's everything is full. So just remember, your sequencing is going to be important as you play your Proxima Midnight, understanding where those discards are, the order in which those card flips happen, and that also goes for your Morbius, ranking up another 2 power if there's other plays happening, because that's an ongoing effect that registers as well. That's going to take some getting used to for a lot of players, because a lot of these deck lists are going to be focusing towards obviously discard, which means Morbius is also going to be on the battlefield as an ongoing effect to factor in consistently to determine where Proxima is going to land. That's why when you look at base card lists like what I've called the future of discard, and I put this in the last video as well with Corvus Glaive, who is the natural synergetic partner, because Corvus Glaive is giving extra power for you to use if you actually think you need to use it at some point, which we're still tinkering with, but this general idea right now for Proxima taking advantage of this is, well, just bonus, because whether it's discarded by MODOK, discarded by even a Lady Sif if all things go wrong, Apocalypse then has another target as well. Your timing on how this all plays out with Proxima is going to be very interesting because of the order of discards on those bigger discard moments, like a Hellcow, a MODOK, etc. And the future of discard, look, if you didn't get Corvus Glaive, you can do the exact same thing with Hellcow, throw in Proxima Midnight, you're just discarding 2 cards, whether it's Hellcow or Corvus Glaive. Either way, this is about as classic of a discard list as it gets. You're gonna play down your Morbius and your Collector as early as possible, then start doing some discarding with your Colleen Wing and your Lady Sif most likely, get the Dracula down on turn 4. If not, honestly, probably just ignore it altogether. Let all of the other effects play out your Hellcow, play out your MODOK, and let your Apocalypse get eaten up by Dracula if it's already been played down. Otherwise, it is a nice, secure, big turn 6 play, plus a couple of swarms, which you may have accumulated 4, maybe even upwards of 6 of at this point in time. There's also going to be a lot of discard going on, so it might be a little bit of fun to kind of mess with your opponent simultaneously, because getting rid of some key core cards from your opponent's hand is, let's be honest, it's really fun. So let's take advantage of that. Let's get rid of cards. We'll use our Moon Knight, we'll use our Silver Samurai, we'll use our Black Bolt, and Stature's gonna have big value this week as even more players dive into discard a little bit differently, because Corvus Glaive opened up that door and now Proxima's walking through it too. So let's bring Stature along for the line, and I said let's make it a Black Bolt Stature deck. This is not playing into MODOK in any way. This is get your Dracula down, hope for the best, and get rid of everything else. Play your Zabu on 2, and you probably never need to play your X-23 because it'll automatically get discarded by a wonged over Moon Knight or a wonged over Silver Surfer if that discards, for example, a Dracula plus X23 because the lowest targeting cards here, if you play your Zabu down and you play your Dracula down, Silver Samurai is going to end up naturally hitting your X23 and your Swarms. So we've got some good targets built into this deck. I think it's going to be a little bit of fun to mess around with your opponent's hand, even if they are playing into discard. I think it's going to be fun to watch those games explode crazy amounts of power, so let's have some fun with it at least. This is the newest evil. This is the biggest deck, honestly, right now, coming in for this card, in my opinion. We've seen this deck start to explode. I even saw, I think it was earlier today, as I'm recording this video, Dexter just put out this version of the deck list without Proxima Midnight, but with She-Hulk. And I'll say confidently, I played this deck last night to see it and understand it, and it is incredibly strong. So I think She-Hulk is probably going to be the card I cut from it to make room for Proxima Midnight, because it's an organic fit given the Blade and the Corvus Glaive, because that's the only discards you need. You have Lady Sif for a super high target discard. You remove your Lockjaw, so there's a loss of randomness, and then you're messing with your opponent simultaneously because you have death. So if you're playing against Destroy, you're getting a cheaper death. And you can also interrupt them because you have armor. So I love this deck, I'm not gonna lie. Protect that Sunspot, keep that Black Knight down, and if you end up getting maybe that magical combination of a 420 in your hand because of the Ebony Blade, you're gonna feel really good, but also really evil about playing it. Because Proxima is just a bonus card that you could just leave in your hand the entire time. If Corvus Glaive gets rid of it, awesome. If Blade gets rid of it, awesome. But the deck doesn't need that to happen. It looks for other win conditions first, and Proxima is an easier condition to add back on later. Even easier, in my opinion, than Black Cat, because it's not only discarded, it automatically goes onto the battlefield, so you don't have to rely on that turn 6 Hela to take advantage of Proxima versus Black Cat. But if Black Cat is the direction you like to go, honestly, just make an autopilot style Hela deck. I'm putting in the Invisible Woman combination into here, even in this world of Eliath, because there's a couple of ways that we could ramp out some early power to play down your Hela behind it on turn 5. This is aiming to be a MODOK on 6 style deck. You've got the X23 in here, which could easily end up being something that Colleen Wing discards, gives you played out your Meek early, or even just with a little bit of luck, get that Corvus Glaive combination up and running just as equally, and boom, there you go. You've got your extra power, drop on down the Hela secretly behind the Invisible Woman early, and then play your discards on the final turn. So you're misordering intentionally with the idea of getting out your X23, getting out your Wolverine, getting out your extra cards for basically free, so you don't have to worry about only turn 6 Hela. This gives you another option and out. And it's a little bit of a self-piloting deck for that reason, because a lot of the pieces are organically play themselves. X23, it's going to put itself down there. Wolverine, it's going to put himself down there. Black Cat, she's going to automatically discard herself. Let the deck pilot itself. But now we can go a different direction with it. Let's get a little cheeky with a different kind of energy cheat. We've seen the popularity start to rise of the Arnim Zola line, because Ravonna Renslayer also has unique synergy here for getting out your Dracula a little bit cheaper, your Morbius a little bit cheaper, and especially on turn 6, that Morbius, which ongoings add at that moment of play. Yeah, that's a really, really strong effect. I'm even going to throw in Grandmaster in here so we have another way to get discard out there, but instead of relying on just 1/1 cost of Blade, we've got a 1/0 that could reactivate your Colleen Wing, Lady Sif, even your MODOK a second time, which could be potentially very dangerous depending on how the game is going. If it's a magic game from your opponent, forget it. You've got some crazy big power coming out onto the board. So let the Swarms acquire, let the Apocalypses, Apocalyppi, I don't know, what's the plural? Let me know in the comments. Let that all up and roll the entire way and get some cheap cards out there. So instead of playing Zabu onto, like we did in the previous decks, let's get out the Ravonna Renslayer onto, then customize which mid cards we're going to use as our discard, whether you're setting up with Dracula or putting down big power for your Lady Sif, getting ready for that Arnim Zola on turn 5 even for some double powers. We've got some pretty fun things coming down the pipeline with this deck. This is probably the least predictable deck, but has a very high ceiling simultaneously. I'm quite excited to try this one out. But there's more than discard. There's more than discard. Discard can be an element, not just the primary focus of the deck. So Of course, first and foremost, we got to put all of them together, right? Let's just throw together every single character from the Black Order. We've got Ebony Maw, we've got Black Swan, Corvus Glaive, Supergiant, Proxima Midnight, Cull Obsidian, and Thanos. So I went with a little bit of a destroy kind of feel to it, so that way if you lockjaw into maybe the Supergiant or lockjaw into even the Ebony Maw, it doesn't feel as bad. But if you put the Ebony Maw down in a specific lane, you can kind of build into the other two lanes and not worry about it, because that Killmonger could hit it later on, ramping up that null. Maybe put down your Ebony Maw with a good timing and put down the Cull Obsidian later on. I mean, there's a couple of different ways that we could work around Ebony Maw because of Supergiant in particular. Also, I like the idea of putting all of them together in one deck just because thematically it's a lot of fun. I just don't know if it's gonna work, because they might work as a team in the comics, but I don't know if they work as a team in Snap. But if we refine a little bit more into that Thanos line, I think then we've got something we can work with here. So here's just a standard Hela Thanos hybrid. I wanted to put Hela into Thanos. It's an option. It's not a needed option to make the deck work, because Thanos decks are Thanos decks. They're incredibly strong as is. Kyera, Cull Obsidian, Thanos, Scar, Magneto, Blob. You get the idea. Proxima Midnight is in here because a 4/7 is still really good stats. So why not capitalize on them? Even if it pops out of Lockjaw, you can't be upset by that. Corvus Glaive is in here because if we're not going to play Black Swan as our energy cheat, let's have Hela bring back at least 2 cards, but I went one step further and put in Gambit as well, so we could get a third one with more value as well, because we're gonna see a lot of discard cards. I don't see as many of these decks this week, the Thanos decks being as prevalent as characters are being tested to combine with Proxima Midnight. So that means more discard cards, which means less chance for your Kyera or your armor, unless if you're playing one of my decks. And lastly, move control. Why? Because if you think about it, it actually works. Look at this. So I got really theory crafty on this one. I wanted to find a way to make Proxima do something different, because Dracula's a really obvious choice, but we want her to land and still have a good effect also. So what if we took it one step further with a card like Storm, who is probably the secret synergy hidden behind Proxima Midnight, and everyone's gonna default, including the first several decks that I presented here, to Dracula. But let's take it a step further. If you play down that Storm and leave it alone, that lane always feels a little bit neglected in some way. But what if you had a way later on to put that discard out there and surprise, ta-da, here's a Proxima Midnight 7 power addition out of nowhere? I think that that's incredibly fun. I think that there's a lot of possibilities there. So I went all in on a Storm deck. So this is Storm Surprise, where we have so many different ways to guarantee a winning Storm lane. We've got Storm, then you can defend it with your Juggernaut, so you get the lane nice and clear. Do you have your Jeff just in case if you need to get in there later? Of course, because maybe you accidentally knocked something with the Stegron in the wrong way and it didn't go into your Kingpin lane, right? Or you just put down the Docket, so that way if your Shard gets discarded, well, that's an extra 4 power that automatically happens, because Dracula doesn't need to take on big cards at the very end. He just needs to take on something. So even if that something is Proxima Midnight, sure, awesome, that's great, that's magical. That's 7 extra power. These are not big targets for Dracula, which is why Zabu's in the deck, and I played more into those 4 drops. Captain Marvel can move into that lane. Spider-Man can move into that lane. Dracula could reactivate that power in that Storm lane later on. Jeff can land in there. There's a bunch of different ways that we can steal and guarantee that Storm lane. So now you're just playing defense in one lane the rest of the game. So if you got your Juggernaut early, you defend the Storm lane that way, and then start stacking and going big. Use your Spider-Man, use your Dracula, use your Stegron, defend a lane, and keep that second lane. But if you make a mistake, you have outs built into the deck too. This is probably the most cheeky build because, I mean, Captain Marvel has not been played in I don't even know how long, but that moving 4 power, considering the low values of many of these cards, could actually be the saving grace, because you don't have to win by a lot. You just have to win by 1. There you go. Throw out a bunch of ideas, good, bad, indifferent. including some classics, which we're gonna see in a multitude of different varieties and shapes and forms over the next few days with Proxima Midnight. Whether you have Corvus Glaive or not is irrelevant. Proxima Midnight is going to be a fun discard card, very similar to Black Cat, but not the same because it's easily guaranteed to land. You just have a harder time hitting it. So it has a double-edged sword built into it, no pun intended, to what she's carrying. So thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for enjoying today's video. If you liked it, hit that comment button down below, subscribe, and I'll see y'all next season.